It is a Thursday afternoon in September. Zara stands in a shoe shop with her daughter. School starts in 4 days. Her daughter's feet grew over the summer, the way children's feet do, without asking permission, without checking the budget. They need school shoes, not new trainers, not fashion, just shoes that will last a term and not fall apart in the rain. Zara finds a pair in her daughter's size, picks them up, turns them over, looks at the price, she puts them back, finds the next pair down, cheaper sole, thinner leather, the kind that might make it to Christmas if they're lucky. Her daughter looks at the first pair, still on the shelf. She doesn't say anything. She learned not to say anything a long time ago, in a supermarket, over a box of cereal. Zara picks up the cheaper pair. She doesn't know why shoes cost this much this year. She just knows they do. She knows that everything costs more this year. Groceries, school supplies, the coat she bought her daughter last month, 30% more than the same coat last year, same shop, same rail. She doesn't know there is a name for what is happening to her. She pays for the cheaper shoes. Her daughter wears them out of the shop. Zara saves the receipt. What just happened to Zara at that shoe shop has a name. It is called a tariff. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. When the government imposes a tariff on shoes made in Vietnam or clothing made in China, the company importing those goods pays a fee at the border. That fee is called a tariff. And then, almost always, the company passes that cost on to you through higher prices at the register. The tariff was on the importer, but you paid it. The 2025 tariffs imposed by the Trump administration are the largest increase in the effective United States tariff rate since 1909. The average effective tariff rate across all imported goods rose to 22.5%, the highest since 1933. The effect on prices is not abstract. Shoe prices rose 39% in the short run. Apparel prices rose 37%. Food prices rose 3.2% in the short run and remained 2.9% higher in the long run. The pair of shoes Zara put back on the shelf costs more because of a policy decision made in Washington, a decision that was announced as a tax on foreign countries, a correction of unfair trade, a tool to bring manufacturing jobs home. Here is what it actually functioned as. Tariffs are a regressive tax. The short-run burden on households at the bottom of the income ladder is 2.5 times greater than the burden on households at the top as a share of income. The people who were told this was a tax on China are paying it at the shoe shop, at the grocery store, at the school supply aisle, and the people paying the most as a share of what they earn are the people who can afford it least. This is not a coincidence. It is a mechanism, and it is connected to everything we have discussed on this channel. To understand what is happening right now, you need to go back to 1930, not to a trade deal, to a disaster. In June 1930, President Herbert Hoover signed a piece of legislation called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, named for Senator Reed Smoot of Utah and Representative Willis Hawley of Oregon, its two chief sponsors. The act raised tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods by an average of 40 to 60%. The stated purpose was to protect American farmers and businesses from foreign competition during the early years of the Great Depression, which had begun in October 1929. Before he signed it, Hoover received a letter signed by 1,028 members of the American Economic Association, the country's leading economists, begging him not to. They warned him it would raise the cost of living for ordinary Americans, devastate farm exports, and trigger retaliation from trading partners that would destroy what remained of global trade. Hoover signed it anyway. What happened next confirmed every warning. United States exports fell from $7 billion in 1929 to $2.5 billion in 1932. Farm exports were down by 1/3 from their 1929 levels by 1933. International trade plummeted 65%. Country after country, Canada, France, Britain, Germany, Australia, responded with their own retaliatory tariffs on American goods. The farmers the act was supposed to protect lost their export markets. The banks that served agricultural communities began to fail. The Great Depression deepened. The Smoot-Hawley Act raised the price of imports to the point that they became unaffordable for all but the wealthy, and it dramatically decreased the amount of exported goods, contributing to bank failures, particularly in agricultural regions.
The lesson was supposedly learned. In 1934, President Roosevelt signed the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act, which began the long process of reducing tariffs through negotiated bilateral agreements. After World War II, the United States led the creation of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, known by its abbreviation GATT, the international framework that governed trade relations between nations for decades, eventually becoming the World Trade Organization, the WTO, in 1995. For the next 80 years, American trade policy moved, with occasional detours, in a broadly consistent direction toward lower tariffs negotiated reciprocally with agreed rules enforced through international institutions. In 2025, that consensus ended. The Trump administration imposed tariffs at the highest level as a percentage with gross domestic product since 1993, amounting to an average tax increase per household of $1,000 in 2025 and $1,500 in 2026. The administration cited unfair trade practices by foreign competitors, persistent trade deficits, and the hollowing out of American manufacturing as justifications. These are legitimate grievances. The question, as we will get to, is whether broad, regressive tariffs are the right tool to address them, or whether they are a solution that falls hardest on the people it was supposed to help. This is how the tariff tax works today. 3 mechanisms. Each one is specific. Each one connects to what we have discussed in earlier episodes. Mechanism 1. The pass-through. When a tariff is imposed on an imported good, the importer pays it. That importer might be a large retailer or manufacturer who uses foreign components. They have 2 choices: absorb the cost themselves and reduce their profit margin, or pass it on to the consumer through a higher price. In practice, research consistently shows that most of the tariff cost is passed through to the consumer. Studies find that tariff pass-through to consumers was at least 30% for goods imported from China by December 2025, and the evidence suggests price pressures developed gradually throughout 2025, rather than as a one-time spike. The cost does not arrive in one moment. It accumulates quietly in the weekly shop, the new school shoes, the winter coat that costs 30% more than it did a year ago. Mechanism 2. The regressivity. This is where the tariff becomes a system of extraction rather than simply a trade tool. Low-income families spend a much larger share of their income on goods, clothing, food, household basics than wealthy families do. Wealthy families spend proportionally more of their income on services, healthcare, legal advice, financial management, education, which are not subject to tariffs. So when tariffs raise the price of clothing by 37% and food by 3%, the family spending 40% of their income on goods feels that increase far more than the family spending 10%. For households at the bottom 20% of income earners, those earning less than $29,000 a year, the 2025 tariffs imposed a tax increase equal to 6.2% of their annual income. For the top 1%, the proportional burden is 4 times smaller. This is the definition of a regressive tax. Not a tax that punishes success, a tax that punishes scarcity. The less you have, the more you pay, as a share of what you earn. If you watched episode 6 of this channel, you will recognize this as the same mechanism we examined in the credit card debt trap. The credit card charges you more the less you have, because a low credit score reflects a history of exclusion rather than a measure of character. The tariff charges you more the less you have, because you spend a larger share of your income on the goods it taxes. Different mechanism, same architecture. The system consistently extracts more from the people at the bottom. And if you watched episode 5 on the inheritance gap, you will recognize the compounding effect. A family without inherited wealth is already paying the poverty premium we examined in episode 2, the extra cost of being poor in banking fees, insurance, and credit. Now add a regressive tariff on top of every pair of shoes and every grocery shop. Each mechanism stacks on top of the last. Mechanism 3, the exemption architecture. Here is what almost nobody reports. The 2025 tariffs did not apply equally to all goods. The administration exempted specific sectors, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, lumber, energy, and critical minerals were all exempted from the April 2nd tariff announcement. Consider what was exempted and what was not. Pharmaceuticals, excluded. Semiconductors, excluded. Energy, excluded. These are industries with powerful lobbying organizations, with significant domestic production, with concentrated corporate interests that made their case to Washington and were heard. Shoes, not excluded. Clothing, not excluded. Fresh produce, not excluded. These are the goods that fill the baskets of low and middle-income families. The industries that make them are largely offshore, with workers who have no Washington lobby and no direct access to the decision-makers. The exemptions are not random. They follow the architecture of power. The industries that could make their case did. The consumers who would pay the most could not. Let us name who profits. The federal government collected $264 billion in customs duties in 2025, compared to $79 billion in 2024. That is a dramatic increase in revenue. But revenue collected is not the same as revenue that helped ordinary people. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the legislative package signed into law by President Trump on July 4, 2025, paired the tariff revenue with the largest tax cut for wealthy Americans in years. The Congressional Budget Office, the United States Congress's independent budget analysts, examined the combined effect of the bill's tax cuts and its cuts to safety net programs. It found that the highest 10% of earners would see their incomes rise by 2.7% by 2034, mainly due to tax cuts. The lowest 10% would see their incomes fall by 3.1%, mainly due to cuts to programs such as Medicaid and food assistance. The mechanism is precise. Poor families pay more at the checkout through regressive tariffs. The revenue collected flows to the federal government. The government uses that revenue partly to fund tax cuts that disproportionately benefit the wealthy, and simultaneously the safety net programs that cushioned low-income families from exactly this kind of price shock, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which provides food assistance, and Medicaid, which provides health insurance, were cut by over $1 trillion in the same legislation. The changes to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program alone will cause 22.3 million families to lose some or all of their benefits, with the average affected family losing $146 per month in food assistance. To understand the full picture, families are paying more at the grocery store because of tariffs and simultaneously losing the food assistance that helped them afford the grocery store. This is not a coincidence. Experts have argued that the bill would create the largest upward transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in American history due to large-scale benefit cuts paired with tax breaks for high-income earners and corporations. The tariff is not a standalone policy. It is one gear in a larger machine. 3 weeks into the school term, the cheaper shoes are already showing wear at the toe. Her daughter hasn't complained. She is 9 years old. She knows when something is not worth saying. Zara is at a parents' evening. The teacher, a young woman who seems tired in the way that teachers have been tired for 3 years now, is apologizing for the class supply list.
She is apologizing because the price of pencils has gone up, the price of the construction paper they need for projects. Even the small things, the teacher says, even the things you wouldn't notice. Zara nods. She notices. She has always noticed. On the bus home, she does the arithmetic that she always does. The shoes, the school supplies, the grocery shop that cost $14 more than last month for the same items. The prescription she needs that the pharmacy told her has gone up. Components sourced overseas, the pharmacist said. Something to do with trade. She is thinking about a number she saw online last week in an article someone shared. The number said that the tariffs would cost the average household in the bottom 20% of earners an amount equal to 6% of their income this year. She did the math on her salary, 6%. She knows what 6% of her salary is. She knows exactly what she does not have. What she is beginning to understand, slowly, the way you understand things that hurt, is that the price of the shoes and the pencils and the groceries and the prescription were not raised by accident. They were raised by a policy that someone designed, that someone signed, that someone named. And the same legislation that raised those prices also cut the food assistance that sometimes helped her close the gap at the end of the month. Both things at the same time. Someone decided that. The tariff regime Zara is living inside was presented as protection. Protection for American workers. Protection for American manufacturing. A correction of decades of unfair trade that hollowed out communities and sent jobs offshore.
These are legitimate grievances. The China shock, the wave of manufacturing job losses that followed China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001, was real. Research estimates it contributed to the loss of approximately 2 million manufacturing jobs in the United States between 1999 and 2011. The communities that bore those losses, in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, the industrial Midwest and South, bore them disproportionately, and they bore them largely without meaningful government support. The problem with broad, regressive tariffs as the solution to those grievances is not that they are protectionist. The problem is that they are paid by the wrong people. The workers whose jobs were displaced lost income. The response was a policy that also reduced the income of the workers who remained, through higher prices on everything they buy, while exempting the industries whose lobbying power protected them from the same treatment. The lesson of Smoot-Hawley, that broad retaliatory tariffs contract trade, raise prices for consumers, hurt farmers and exporters, and invite retaliation that destroys the export markets the policy was supposed to defend, was not unknown to policymakers in 2025. It was simply not the priority. So what actually works? Solution 1. Targeted tariffs with worker protection. The fundamental argument is not that tariffs are never appropriate. Targeted tariffs on specific strategic industries, semiconductors, electric vehicles, critical minerals, combined with genuine domestic investment in those sectors, can make sense as industrial policy. The key word is targeted. What does not work, and what the research from Smoot-Hawley to the present consistently confirms, is broad consumer goods tariffs without accompanying support for the workers and families who pay the higher prices. The Trade Adjustment Assistance Program, which existed from 1962 until it was allowed to lapse in 2022, was the mechanism designed to provide exactly this support. It provided job retraining, income support, and healthcare assistance to workers displaced by trade. Workers who went through the program earned, on average, $50,000 more over a 10-year period than those who did not access it. The program was imperfect and underfunded, but it was a genuine attempt to ensure that the workers' trade policy was supposed to help actually received support. It lapsed in 2022 because Congress failed to reauthorize it. In 2025, while collecting $264 billion in tariff revenue, the second Trump administration proposed eliminating the program entirely. The money was there. The political will was not. Representative Linda Sanchez introduced the Trade Adjustment Assistance Modernization Act in March 2026, which would renew and expand the program. Nearly 200,000 workers have filed petitions to receive assistance since the program expired, with their cases still pending due to the lapse in authorization. They are waiting. The program that was supposed to catch them has been switched off. The tariffs that raised prices for them are still running. Solution 2. Progressive tariff design. The exemption architecture of the 2025 tariffs, which protected pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and energy, while taxing shoes, clothing, and food, could be inverted. A progressively designed tariff schedule would minimize or eliminate tariffs on goods that form the largest share of low-income household budgets and place higher rates on luxury imports, premium vehicles, designer goods, and high-end electronics that form a larger share of wealthy household spending. This is not a theoretical model. The European Union applies differentiated tariff rates partly based on product type. Several countries explicitly account for the distributional impact of trade taxes in their design. The United States currently does the opposite. Solution 3. The tariff dividend. This is the most powerful and arguably most politically viable structural solution. Collect the tariff revenue, redistribute it directly to households as a dividend, more to lower-income families, less to higher-income ones. The tariff remains. The regressivity is corrected through redistribution. The model exists in practice. The Alaska Permanent Fund has distributed a share of the state's oil revenue to every Alaska resident annually since 1982. In 2023, the dividend was $1,312 per person. A federal tariff dividend, even a partial one, applied to the bottom 40% of earners would offset the regressive burden of the current tariff regime while maintaining whatever trade policy objectives the tariff is meant to serve. The revenue collected from 2025 tariffs, $264 billion, was instead used partly to fund tax cuts that disproportionately benefited the wealthy. The money was real. The political choice of where it went was also real. Solution 4. Renew multilateral trade reform. The administration's own December 2025 communication to the World Trade Organization outlined a trade agenda that is largely shared by other trading partners, enforcing existing agreements, addressing state-led mercantilist practices, reforming the dispute resolution system. These are legitimate trade objectives. They can be pursued through multilateral negotiation rather than through unilateral tariffs that invite retaliation, contract global trade, and fall most heavily on domestic consumers. The Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act that ended the Smoot-Hawley era was not a surrender of American interests. It was a recognition that negotiated rules-based trade produced better outcomes for American workers and consumers than unilateral tariffs that triggered retaliatory spirals. Solution 5. Domestic investment over consumption taxes. The stated goal of the 2025 tariffs, reshoring manufacturing, rebuilding domestic industrial capacity, can be pursued through direct domestic investment incentives rather than through consumption taxes on imported goods. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, the climate and clean energy legislation passed under President Biden, demonstrated that targeted tax incentives for domestic production attract private investment, create manufacturing jobs, and stimulate industrial activity without raising prices at the checkout. By 2025, the clean energy provisions of that act had attracted an estimated $350 billion in private investment and created over 300,000 manufacturing jobs. The One Big Beautiful Bill phased out many of those incentives.
The choice between tariffs and domestic investment incentives is not a choice between protecting American workers and abandoning them. It is a choice between who pays for the protection. A tariff charges the consumer at the register. An investment incentive is paid by the public through the tax base, progressively, based on what people earn. One is regressive, one is not. Here is what I want you to remember. Zara put those shoes back on the shelf because the price went up, not because she became poorer, because a policy decision made in Washington made them more expensive. A tariff applied to shoes manufactured overseas. A tariff that was collected at the border, passed on to the retailer, and passed on to Zara in a number on a price tag she could not afford. The tariff was announced as a tax on foreign countries, on unfair trade, on the system that hollowed out American manufacturing and left communities behind. But the economists who signed the letter in 1930 said it plainly. You cannot protect domestic workers by raising the price of everything domestic workers buy. The protection falls on the producer. The cost falls on the consumer, and the consumer who pays the most as a share of what they earn is always the one at the bottom. The 2025 tariffs cost the bottom 20% of American earners 6% of their income. They cost the top 1% proportionally 4 times less. The revenue they generated was partly funded to tax cuts that increased the income of the wealthiest households by 2.7%. The safety net programs that helped low-income families absorb exactly this kind of price shock were cut by more than $1 trillion in the same legislation. This is not an accident. It is an architecture. The tariff was the tool. The exemptions were the tell. Pharmaceuticals protected. Energy protected. Semiconductors protected. Shoes, clothing, and groceries not protected. The industries with access to power drew the lines. The families without access paid within them. We have now spent 7 episodes on this channel examining the mechanisms by which wealth moves upward while poverty is embedded downward. The inheritance gap encoded in policy since 1944. The debt trap engineered through a Supreme Court ruling in 1978. The credit score that measures exclusion and calls it risk, and now the tariff, a tax on the necessities of ordinary life, structured so that those who have the least pay the most of it. None of these is a force of nature. Every one of them was a choice, which means they can all be made differently. Zara's daughter will need new shoes again in the spring. The question is whether by then someone will have decided that the people who most need protection are the ones at the register, not the industries in the boardroom. That is the question the next election, the next budget, the next trade negotiation will answer. Now you know what to ask.